wealth. So instead of necessarily focusing on single family zoning as the use, maybe look at some of the regulatory tools that we're using when we are evaluating single family zoning developments. Maybe we need to look at getting rid of parking minimums, because that lends to increased costs in providing housing. I was looking where it said, a surface parking space can cost $5,000. When you get into multifamily and even higher multifamily developments, those parking spaces in a parking deck can go up to $50,000. That can become cost prohibitive. So maybe looking at parking standards. Also looking at lot areas, lot widths, minimum lots. Maybe we need to adjust the way we think about that such that you still are able to support the dream of owning your own home, but maybe you could still have that same home, but on a smaller lot. One thing that actually stuck out to me was an example that I read in Memphis. This is where it would require additional collaboration between the local government, county, and at the state level. As many of you all know, we use the International Code Council to govern our building codes when it comes to different types of developments. There's one particular area in Memphis where they talked about how they were able to work together in applying the residential code when it comes to developing and building lower, smaller multifamily units, as opposed to treating them as commercial. Because right now, I know even in the state of Georgia, when it comes to multifamily units, it's treated as commercial construction, which comes at a higher cost. So if we maybe can sit down, talk with the Department of Community Affairs, really strategically look at, instead of when it comes to low-rise multifamily or low-rise multifamily in particular, instead of treating it as commercial construction, maybe we can look at using the International Residential Code, which would come at a lower cost and also provide some of those housing opportunities, which one would benefit people who are looking for places to live here, but also beneficial to that developer that's looking to build housing for people in different income ranges. I hope I've answered that question. So.
Thank you. You're bringing in some innovation there. Matt, do you want to weigh in any on what the city has been doing around density and balancing all those desires that we have for our city?
Yeah, we talked about public land, and I think that this administration's vision around neighborhoods is we have to make sure that neighborhoods have the amenities that they need to support population growth. And I think that's part of it is, if we're part of the work around Campbellton Road is that if we can bring additional transit, then maybe that helps build out some of the vacant or underutilized commercial along that road. Density can be a scary word for folks. I think it can oftentimes mean tall buildings, so maybe as your neighbor you can't see the sun, or it means more traffic. But it also just means more people, more households. And I think Atlanta is a pretty accommodating place. It's a pretty diverse place. And I think when we talk about just inviting more people and making sure that we're building the housing that accommodates a wide array of different lifestyles and different household styles that live in the city. I don't think we do the best job. I think we do a good job of building housing in Atlanta. But we're working at an organization called the Housing Innovation Lab. And when you look at building codes and you look at some of the zoning restrictions, it does make new types of housing more difficult, and particularly to accommodate all the new people that want to move to Atlanta, it makes it more difficult. And I'm sitting next to a person who deals in these costs. Darian, if you want to talk about how land is and what density means for your projects.
Yeah. I think the context around this conversation is probably more important than the actual technical aspects behind it. When you hear about this area median income and things like that, I think it's important to level set. So when you have an average family, the area median income in Atlanta, the metropolitan area, is about $100,000. And those people that you hear are coming to Atlanta, a lot of them have those salaries. So all of these folks that are coming to the metro area have very high salaries. So what that's doing is pushing up the average area income. So when you're talking about somebody that makes 50% of the average income, that's $50,000. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, that doesn't sound like a poor person. But technically, it is. And it's unfortunate to be making $50,000 or $60,000 and to be considered, in essence, poor. And we're having a lot of legacy residents of the city and a lot of other cities around this country being left behind because of these areas that are growing for very good reason. You're leaving behind just regular working class folks. So it makes the work that I'm doing, unfortunately, very necessary to build for the lowest income levels of our city. And the city of Atlanta is doing really great work and putting money behind it to build even for folks that are homeless. And a lot of folks that you know are just a paycheck away from that. And it's really important to understand that piece because it leads to this housing stock that we need and why we need it. You need low-income housing tax credits to house people that make up to literally $60,000. And you know, I'm an engineer. I'm a civil engineer, graduated from Georgia Tech. And my first job that I made, even though this is, over 20 years ago, I was making $40,000 and it was the most money I've ever made. Literally fast forward 20 years until now, I'm a poor person. And incomes are not keeping up with housing. And that's really what we're solving for. So this entire conversation is really about how people are being left behind. And that's important to kind of level set. Now, the technical parts behind it are important as well. The tools and the resources that the city's using, putting local dollars behind this kind of work, because if you've been keeping up with the news, those federal dollars are not guaranteed. So what the city's doing is really important to our housing stock because we don't know with the change of an administration how a lot of the dollars that have been used to build most of the housing in this country could literally not be here tomorrow with the stroke of a pen. So the work that Matt's team is doing and the work that the mayor is doing is really, really important to say, hey, we're gonna float, these projects. We're actually gonna, do bonds that are based on the city's revenue to fund these types of projects and say we're not gonna necessarily rely on the state and on the federal government to house residents in our city. So that is really what's behind a lot of this work. And I'm just lucky enough to be working on some of the projects for the Rapid Housing Initiative, which is an initiative to build 500 units of housing for the homeless by the end of this year. And we're having to use some really creative methods to do that in terms of delivering those housing units, but also being able to have the funding that's at hand. And it's been really, really great to see how the city is moving the needle on that and being able to provide resources that as a private developer, I just wouldn't have access to, and I couldn't build this housing on my own. You need this public-private partnership to really be able to house these people that are being left behind.
Thank you so much, Darian. And we're going to turn to talk about downtown. So why don't we just stay with you for a minute? Could you talk a little bit specifically about the Melody and what it is for anybody who might not know, and then the project at the Waterworks? Just give a quick outline of what they are so people know how they're impacting.
Yeah, so Mayor Dickens' Rapid Housing Initiative, again, is an initiative to build 500 units of housing for the homeless by the end of 2025. If you know anything about development, it takes a very long time to build traditional housing. And the mayor said we need to find a different way to deliver housing that's quality, but can do it, much quicker. So the city identified a parking lot in downtown Atlanta. It's next to the Garnet MARTA station. It's about 0.7 acres, and it was then used as a parking lot for police cars. And the city said, this is underutilized land. We could use it for a higher use. Let's use it for housing. So that was the first site that was given to me to say, hey, get housing onto this parking lot. The city at the same time also received a donation from the state of some shipping containers and said, I need you to use this as well. So I was given this mix of a parking lot and some shipping containers, and they told me to go build some housing. So, fast forward 4 months, and we basically delivered the quickest multifamily project in City of Atlanta's history. It turned out to be, this project that opened all of our eyes to like how you can actually do housing if everybody's rowing in the same direction and if everybody has the same mission. So the city of Atlanta's planning department, the mayor's office in terms of the funding, the developer myself being able to produce these units without any of the hurdles that regular developers go through in terms of permitting and zoning. So being able to have city land, the city's exempt from its own zoning code. So in this case, we used it to our advantage to be able to, as quickly as we had a design, we could go to construction, as opposed to a lot of developers then have to go to NPU meetings, to neighborhood meetings, and that's a great process of vetting, projects for your community, but it's also creates a lot of hurdles and it delays the development process. And if you delay housing, it becomes more expensive. Doing a project next year, the same project is more expensive than doing it now. So the city used this, use this land, use their resources, and use their exemption from entitlements to be able to deliver this project in record time. Doing 40 units of multifamily housing in 4 months from October 2023 to January 2024 is literally unheard of. But we were given this mandate to do something that had never been done. We didn't know how we were going to do it. But when you have the leadership of the city and you have the funding of the city behind it, it's quite literally amazing what you can do when everybody is aligned. And we feel that this initiative is going to grow into something where this is how housing in general is being done. Not just housing for the homeless, not just housing for the least of us, but just how housing should happen. Projects shouldn't take 6 months to get permitted. We got our building permit in about 2 weeks, and that's a credit to a lot of folks in this room and the planning department. But why can't every project get their building permit in 2 weeks? And those are the kind of conversations that are coming out of this rapid housing initiative, in addition to great housing for the homeless. So we're doing a lot more of that kind of work. We have 2 more projects that are just kicking off. They're 100 units each using public land that was offered by the city. One of them is in West Midtown. Another one is in Mechanicsville. And we're using innovative delivery methods of modular housing where the housing is being built off-site. And then while we're doing the infrastructure, that housing is being built off-site and is being then shipped. And then we basically install it. So basically modular construction, off-site construction. So that is one of the mechanisms we're using from a technical side of how we're delivering this housing. But what's more important is the partnership with the city that's allowing us to go at breakneck speed.
Thank you very much. Wait just a second. We have this beautiful stack of questions that are starting to come up here. So I'm just going to ask one more of our own, and then I'm going to turn to you all because I'm guessing y'all are covered some of the things that we wanted to cover in your question. So you wanted to add on that before I jump into the next
I
one?
just wanted to add to his discussion about everybody working collaboratively to make this vision
Yes.
become a reality. I will like to say, touting the Department of City Planning, one of the things to make sure that we are implementing the mayor's initiative, the department essentially created a housing affordability stream with employees in the Department of City Planning. So if there's a project that actually comes to the department that is supporting affordable housing goals, there's a dedicated team of people to assist that particular developer in going through the permitting process, the inspections processes, plan review processes, so that it won't get bogged down in a lot of red tape. Other things outside of affordable housing that the department is doing, the department over the last few years, even though I just got here in November, but over the last couple of years, they've really been looking at how to streamline a lot of its processes, whether it be through online applications or something as simple as when you come into the office in person, you have a dedicated person who can walk you through all of those processes to make your experience in the Department of City Planning a more pleasant experience, and you don't feel like, oh, I have to do all of these things. And then the other thing that we're really trying to work on is just improve our relationships with our partner departments, because even though city planning is the front-facing department for everything that goes on in the city, construction-wise and development-wise, we actually have to work with other departments. A lot of what we do depends on watershed. It depends on public works. It depends on the fire department. the police department in other cases. So we're even looking at how can we improve our relationships with our partner departments so that when various developments, whether they are affordable housing projects or just projects in general, how do we as a team collectively ensure that that developer or builder has a pleasant experience when they're going through the regulatory processes in the city?
Yeah, so important. As Darian said, all that is money. Time is money. So yeah, so important. So so Matt, I'm going to turn to you for this. Just y'all know there's a lot happening in downtown Atlanta. So everybody has seen it. You know, there's the Gulch development, the plans for South Downtown, the one more renovation of Underground going on. There's a lot happening. The World Cup coming. So can you Georgia State's growth? Can't forget that, right? So can you talk to us a little bit just about affordable housing downtown in particular, what the city has done, what the city is projecting to do downtown during all this change?
Yeah, so you did a good job of mentioning a lot of the projects, right? At least I don't skip that assignment. So I think the first is I would just talk about just housing in downtown. It's one of the goals is to make sure that we're building more housing in downtown for people to live, so that it can become, I think, really take advantage of the potential we all see for our downtown. It's serviced by MARTA. It has access to so many different amenities, so many jobs are nearby. And yet the total number of folks that are living in downtown is relatively small. I mean, we have more hotel visitors in downtown Atlanta right now than we do have residents of Atlanta. I think that's not really taking advantage of what could be one of our best neighborhoods. I mean, I work downtown. I love downtown. And we want to build more housing opportunities for people to be able to live downtown. And we think the more people that live downtown, the more people are going to want to live downtown. And as part of that mission, we want to make sure that as we're introducing more housing, we're making sure that that housing is mixed income, and that we can make folks that can access the center, the heart of our city, all of Atlanta can access that, and not just folks that can afford to live on the penthouse floor, right? I mean, I think we are part of the mission is at projects like 2 Peachtree. So on a call today with another project at 360 Peachtree, and there's a whole host of other new affordable housing, new housing. The goal is to really introduce about a third to 40% of the new housing stock that's introduced into downtown is being accessible to folks earning less than 80% AMI. So, and then a large percent of those to be folks accessible to 60% AMI, which I think we had talked about it before. For a one-person bedroom, that's about a $45,000 a year salary. And so I think we want to make downtown a place that's accessible to all Atlantans. And then as we continue to add and we continue to build on our successes, that it doesn't price out folks, right? That they can continue to live in our downtown, for the next 100 years.
So one of the questions we have is about downtown, and it's specifically asking, how can we get more housing options for families downtown? So Dan reflected on the loss of the 3-bedroom and more size. Do you have any responses to that? I mean, I know it's more expensive downtown.
Yeah, well, we have to build it. There's the first part. And that's really hard. I was on a call just the other day, and Darian can speak to this as a developer. 3-bedroom housing is very expensive.
Yes.
And often what you had too is when you build 3-bedroom housing in a place like downtown, developers will build it for roommates, not for families.
Yes.
Because a roommate situation, that's 3 earners, and the most you get out of a 3-bedroom with a family is 2. It's also easier to trade because the market for housing in a place like downtown, there's a lot bigger market for roommates than there is for families. And so I think the first thing is we got to build a downtown that's great for families. And I think the second and it's one of the things we're doing is a lot of our public projects, we are requiring 3-bedrooms to get built, that they're built to the standards that are appropriate for a family. And I think that's going to do a good job of at least priming the pump. But, that's only going to introduce, I think at the most for a lot of affordable housing projects, I think 5 or 10% of the units are at that level. If you go more than that, it starts to impose significant costs on projects, which needs to be made up by additional subsidy, which means you are now spending, instead of money that could go to building more affordable housing, you're subsidizing the 3-bedrooms. I think that's important. It's a balance. I think we also just have to create an environment where the market's also producing a lot of 3-bedroom housing. And that, folks feel comfortable and they want to live in downtown as a family and can be able to access that.
I have two questions that seem to be related, and I think they probably are both housing help center related. So I don't know who's best to answer them, but I'm going to shout them out there. I'm guessing it might be you, or no, it might be okay. It's Matt. All right. So the first one, I'll read them both actually, so we just get through them. How do people apply for affordable housing? So how do you know where it is and how do you apply for it? And then where do families who need to purchase or rent affordable housing go for assistance? How are we reaching out to them? So how do they come to us and how do we reach out to them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we mentioned before we were providing all these resources, but folks may not always know about the resources or know how to access them. So the Housing Help Center, it's a physical location that's located in the 2 Peachtree building in downtown. I would suggest if y'all have questions about accessing affordability, you can visit in person. They also have a website. I don't know off the top of my head what it is, but if you Google Housing Help Center Atlanta, it's at the top of the Google search. And I think we also have a QR code outside and the website address that my colleague Colin is referring to. So that's a good place to get started. Another thing that we're working on right now is what we don't have in the city is sort of a one-stop shop to access all of the different, when we talk about subsidized, they're income restricted affordable housing units. Income restricted means you can't just walk up, you actually have to qualify for them. Right now we do it on a property by property basis, and almost every single, when we talk LIHTC, tax credit affordable housing project, it has a line. There's a waiting list to get in. What we're trying to do is to create a system where that's more centralized. We're working on that right now. And so I'm hoping within the next year or so, we can say, the Housing Help Center not only can point you to individual units, that it can also point you to a system like apartments.com, but apartments.com for affordable housing, to be able to access it. But there are folks at the Housing Help Center that are going to be a lot better at answering this question than I am. So if you do have that question, you can talk to some folks when you're leaving, and we'll get you set up.
Thank you. Andy, you wanted to say something on that?
Yeah, just a point of clarification that might be helpful for folks to understand also, around the housing lingo. When Matt says households that qualify for the housing, what we're talking about is making sure that as the city makes investments in creating what we're calling affordable housing, right, for households that make certain incomes, we're spending money specifically to create units that is affordable for those households. We want to make sure that people who actually make those incomes are the ones that actually have the benefit of living in them, right? So that's what Matt is talking about when he says people qualifying for being able to rent or buy these houses. It's a matter of ensuring, right, that we're actually serving the people that we're intending to.
Right. Right. I think this one might be for you, Janisa. It's around single family, okay. So, what can the community do to keep the legacy residents in the neighborhood? So, when I think of that, I think of our long-term homeowners who've been in some of these neighborhoods for a very long time. And what support services does the city offer?
So at this point, I probably can't specifically speak to services that the city of Atlanta offers, but I am aware of certain services for legacy homeowners who want to keep their home. They're doing everything they can to make sure that they're maintaining their home in a good manner. I know, for example, Habitat for Humanity started a Repair with Kindness program, which is something that many legacy residents, particularly residents that have reached a certain age in life, can actually look into that Repair with Kindness program, because it's so, even though Habitat is in the business of providing housing for people, they also recognize the need to, how can we help people stay in their homes? And that Repair with Kindness program is one of those programs that kind of assists people with doing, maybe their roof needs replacing, or maybe they need some type of HVAC system replaced. I know a lot of local governments also through their budgets, are providing funding resources to create programs to assist local residents in maintaining small system improvements within their home so that they can continue to live in them.
Right, and the city of Atlanta does that through Invest Atlanta. Do you want to speak to that, Matt? The owner occupied rehab program.
Yeah, so we're joined by Anita Allgood tonight, somewhere in the crowd, who leads our single family programs at Invest Atlanta, and she can speak to a lot more about that. But we have an owner occupied rehab program. We also have in the city of Atlanta and in the Fulton County, a lot of seniors don't even know about existing tax exemptions,
Right.
homestead exemptions. We did work in the West Side for the West Side Future Fund, and we found there were hundreds of seniors that owned property in the West Side and weren't signed up for the homestead tax exemption program. And that is significant property tax savings. It's early. It's good to get it done now because the state just enacted. I think the city also has enacted limitations on how much they can grow over time, as well as the exemption becomes more valuable over time. I'll also refer to there are a lot of anti-displacement property tax relief programs in place. And so the West Side Future Fund manages one. Invest Atlanta has a handful of, I think, programs right now, and then the Beltline also has some.
Right.
And so these are like the property tax exemption program. They limit how much your property taxes can increase over time, which is a huge part of the pressure that forces particularly seniors out of their homes. So if you got combination of relief on property taxes and you can help for your renovation of your home so you can make sure your roof is intact. I think that's what exists today. And again, Housing Help Center or go to Invest Atlanta and you should be able to find their programs on the website.
Great. I have a couple here that you may want to weigh in first on, Darian. They're about federal funding for development. So considering the chaos we've just been through this week with potential cuts to federal funding, how do those decisions impact Atlanta's housing for Atlanta residents? And for example, if LIHTC went away, do we have any alternatives? What are, how.
Yeah, what I think we've seen over the last couple of days is a notice, and I think all local jurisdictions and states are on notice, is that you're going to have to be self-sufficient, and you better have a business model that does that, and housing is not exempt. Because if certain federal programs go away, it's literally a spigot. And I don't know if you guys know of any federal workers. For a time, they were literally locked out of federal funds. And then that spigot got turned back on earlier today. And that is how a lot of things get done from that pipeline down from the feds, to the local level. And housing, is not exempt from that. So the city is already kind of ahead of that. The city of Atlanta is ahead of that, of like trying to fund its housing supply. And I think the states and counties are going to have to do more of putting a line item for housing. It's become a critical need. It's not just something that's a private market commodity. It's something where you're not going to be able to be successful as a locality if you do not have housing in place. And you're not going to be necessarily able to rely on the federal government to make sure you have that housing stock. So, I try to preach it to anyone who will listen in any jurisdiction that will listen, is that you better have housing as a line item. If you think it's important, most politicians say, and they will stump on how housing is very important. And then you look at their budget and quite literally, there's not a penny that's going towards housing. They do rely on the federal government and then they take the credit for that, but they're not putting any of their own dollars behind it. And the city of Atlanta is definitely not in that boat. But I really think that is what is going to be, in a weird way, I think that was a fortunate thing that happened yesterday, is that it really showed everybody the reality of that these things are not granted. Federal dollars are not granted to you. With the change of an administration and the change of a, idea about how the country should be run, your local neighborhoods can be affected. So we need to kind of now bunch together and say, we're going to have to protect ourselves. We're going to have to fund this housing on our own, counties, states, cities, because I think it's the message has been sent loud and clear as of the last couple of days.
Absolutely. Okay, this is a question about Atlanta City Design, which was a lot of work that was done in the city of Atlanta during the previous administration that we're still building on. So the question is, I'm sorry, it's like really small print. Okay, so looking at future growth and how it can be accommodated in Atlanta City Design, it laid out that there were dense commercial areas with public transit corridors where where more density could be focused. Do you disagree with what is said in the Atlanta City Design, and if so, what has changed? What has changed, I guess. So, any of you want to speak to Atlanta City Design? Andy is reaching. Okay.
Yeah. So if y'all have looked at the document, and certainly at the most recent proposal for Plan A, I think the most basic layer of planning in there is the assignment of character areas, right? And I think it's the conservation neighborhoods and it's other growth areas, right? That sort of fundamentally place the land that we have, the limited land that we have, in these categories to help guide future decision making about how we grow as a city. And those conservation areas are, they take up the vast majority of the actual geographic area of the city, right? It's mostly the single family neighborhoods all around downtown and midtown. And the goal, as stated in the document and in city design, is to recognize the value of the single family neighborhoods and the sort of unique quality that they bring to living here in the city, and to try and preserve that quality as much as possible by retaining the the relative structure of the zoning regulations that oversee or that determine the amount of growth and the kind of growth that can happen in those areas, right? What that does is it pushes the the necessity of accommodating growth to our corridors, our nodes, our our neighborhood commercial nodes, our larger commercial nodes, our corridors that have business traffic and commuter traffic. Maybe some streets are classified in different ways, right? There's arterials, there's collectors, there's corridors. But what this strategy does is, excuse me, I'm sorry, pushes the responsibility of accommodating the growth that we know we need into these other areas, right? The nodes and the corridors, which I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think that could work. That would certainly help promote the implementation of transit along those corridors, right? And get access to better and more consistent transit to the neighborhoods that need it, to help alleviate the traffic problems that we have, to help reduce the cost of living and owning a car. But I think it's important to acknowledge that by making the choice of preserving these single family neighborhoods and keeping them as stable and as consistent with how they currently are, that we're definitely forcing the issue onto accommodating growth in those other areas, downtown included, of course, right, in Midtown and Buckhead and those sort of the larger commercial areas, but certainly along our nodes and corridors. And a lot of times that means having more intense development in areas that are right behind folks' backyard, right? I mean, we have single family neighborhoods that line all of these corridors that surround these little commercial nodes. I live in East Atlanta, right? We have the East Atlanta Village there. We got single family zoning and single family houses all around the commercial district there. So it puts into play a lot of consideration about how we manage not only the higher intensity development that we need to have in these nodes and corridors, but how to also we manage the transitions between that higher intensity development and the single family development that's directly adjacent, right? And I think um, that our zoning ordinance has navigated those transitions fairly well. There's always room for improvement, but I think I'll just get back to the main point one more time because I think it's important. Is that by making the decision to preserve our single family neighborhoods, not promote sort of a broader expansion of accessory dwelling units and the inclusion of missing middle housing, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, but sort of really keeping it very single family oriented. We're pushing the need for growth accommodation into these other areas where it does make where it's easier to accommodate, right? The corridors and the nodes.
We're also kind of closing the door behind us, like you can't enjoy what we're enjoying in the single family neighborhood. So I've been told we're kind of out of time, and that's correct, right, Nate? So what I'm just going to do quickly, Nate, if you'll give me the privilege, I'm going to read, so it's on the public record. I'm going to read the topics of these other questions. I'm not going to read every question, but at least you'll know sort of what were things people were thinking about. So the next one is about missing middle housing. How do we accommodate missing middle housing in our single family neighborhoods? The other is about our youth. How do we have conversations with our youth about housing for their aging parents and grandparents? The other is about racial equity and legacy residents. How is the city considering the impacts on our existing residents, and how do we support diverse lifestyles, Black and Native residents? The other is high demand events. I mentioned World Cup. How do we accommodate large events? How does that impact housing and people who are unhoused? The other is about accessory dwelling units, and in particular, the permitting process for them. How can that be improved? The other is about people who are unhoused, which I think we talked about a little bit. And then the other is about boarded up homes in our neighborhoods, the impact that they have on our neighborhoods, and what can the city do about the impact of that blight. And then the other is when a developer is required to have affordable units, who is making sure that those units are in compliance and are staying affordable long term. So really good questions. Thank you to our panelists. Y'all give them a round of applause.
And thank you, Natalie, for facilitating. Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming out. It was a gorgeous day.